The water wars have begun. We treat one of the most critical natural resources in the world like it's free. Iron's not free, gold's not free. Agribusiness is the business of mining water. If you want to go enter this new field of taking a business from an idea to a successful business, at least start with studying how others did it. Ask for help. Bring in advisors that complement your weaknesses. I would say that if there was any one key thing that I caught on to is that you don't know what you don't know, right? When it came to entrepreneurship, I really realized I was the novice at this. I'm going to use a tomato. You built the farm, then invested in pre-production burn working capital for 8 to 12 weeks till it begins to harvest. Then you start selling and your customers pay you the best ones in 45 days and the worst in 90. Think of that cash to cash cycle. So you have so much risk on that vine, right? That damn thing has to work. It's about $5 million to build an MVP, right? Which of course you can imagine was a challenge. That was the strategy, was to start with anchor investors that would bring both legitimacy and credibility, to then go after the institutions, because I knew they wouldn't be an easy win. This was not a natural fit. If you won't put your own money in, don't put other people's money in. So relative to your means, if you're a billionaire, you better put a lot. But if you're poor, just something, but you should take that risk alongside your other people. Because when you start putting your own capital into something, you start to think differently about, have I really thought about these risks? Have I really thought about the competition? Did I have an honest conversation about that?
I think that's probably why your financial astuteness, your investor lens that you look at things, is probably a big part of why you've been able to successfully raise almost $300 million. So
it surprised me. You asked about 13 raises. I thought all these years later, I'd be fighting money off with a stick. Instead, it continues to be a challenging piece of the business. And Lord knows this is not the easiest job, right? It has burned some people out. I've struggled with burnout at times. On the other hand, I think that, if the journey is harder, right, the victory's sweeter. I think we're quite proud of what we built.
Hey founders, ready to match with your next investor? At lucidityinsights.com, we've built the Middle East's first Tinder for startup founders and VCs. Explore 800 verified VC and angel profiles, see who they're funding, and send your pitch deck directly, all in one place. Stop waiting for introductions. Make your own luck at lucidityinsights.com. And for a limited time, get 20% off your startup registration with the code TPP20 at checkout.
Hi, and welcome to Lucidity Insights podcast called Startup Spotlights. I'm so excited to have Skye Kurtz with us today, who is the founder or co-founder and CEO of Pure Harvest. Skye, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Erika. Good to see you.
I'm so excited to have you. We've been talking to so many startup founders in the region, and it was absolutely imperative that we get you on the show because, of course, we're talking about big success stories, big fundraising numbers, founders that have been able to successfully scale from early stage to growth stage. And I would consider you later stage now, right?
We're getting there, long in the tooth, as I call it.
Yeah.
But not yet successful till we deliver the financial outcome our investors expect. But I would say we've hit some key milestones on raising a lot of capital, building a real business, and hitting profitability, which is the most important milestone of all.
Spoken like the true investor that you once were before you put on the founding or the founder's hat. Tell everyone here, this is why I'm really excited, because you have this immense experience as a founder. And when we get into Pure Harvest, what you guys are doing with controlled environment farming. Is that what you call it?
Controlled environment agriculture.
Yeah, CEA. It's immense what you guys are up to. This is not just like a flimsy startup. This is like brick and mortar infrastructure building, capital intensive. I mean, it's daunting just thinking about it. And when I think about all the verticals that you're managing. But I want to start before that founder story begins, where you were in San Francisco as a investor first, mostly in private equity for over a decade, I think.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So tell me about that. Tell me about your investor years and why you think you made that jump to entrepreneurship. Because I hear a lot of investors kind of fantasize about it, but the truth is I know very few successful stories. It's usually the other way around, where startup founder goes, all right, done. I've done such a great job. Now I'm going to sit on the other side of the table and like help a bunch of other founders out.
Very true. Yeah, my story is unusual. I started actually in New York. I worked at Lehman Brothers, the famous investment bank. May it rest in peace. I was there when it was healthy, and also my piece of the business was healthy. No relationship to the real estate business that brought it down.
Were you there when it died in 2008?
I left 1 year before.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of my colleagues were still in it, but I was in the leveraged finance, global leveraged finance group, which is acquisition finance, predominantly for private equity sponsors. So working on LBOs and division, divestitures, et cetera. So M&A and financing of M&A. And that was great training. I think everyone knows the investment banking programs are tremendous training, but also quite a brutal, it's like finance boot camp. And I loved it, had a great experience. I mean, I was one of the few people who actually enjoyed the job, though I hated sleeplessness. But then I was recruited to one of my clients, to a private equity firm, and that's how I went into private equity. If I'm honest, at the time, I didn't have some specific vision for my career. I grew up, quite poor by U.S. standards, in a low-income household, and I really thought, how do I make financial success? And I hear there's a lot of money on Wall Street. I'm going to go to Wall Street. That sounds great. And I was just driving to whatever was next, sort of, if anything, moved by the inertia around me. If private equity was the harder to get job that paid better, that's the one I wanted. And didn't have my own direction at the time, just one specific objective, which was, breakout financial success to try to, support myself and support my family. Now, in New York, I worked at what was J.P. Morgan's private investment arm called J.P. Morgan Partners, and it spun out and became a generalist investment firm called CCMP Capital, Chase Chemical Morgan Partners, all the banks that amalgamated to become J.P. Morgan. And I worked there for several years as a generalist, working in every sector in consumer, industrials, chemicals, semiconductor, capital equipment, healthcare, and got a great taste for the economy, if you will, and investing with different personalities, different methods. And that was great training. But then I left to do my MBA at Stanford. And that's when you ask about entrepreneurship. That was where I really started to open my eyes to that possibility. I sort of thought prior to that, I'm not sure that's for me. The risk appetite, I was concerned about that. I very much was and remain to some extent risk averse, fearing financial loss and fearing, I'm the classic in that test they do of if somebody's, the benefits of the gain are outweighed by the fear of the loss. I'm definitely somebody who sits on that curve. I do not like losing money. And
that's fascinating to me, considering the business you decided to launch.
And all of the risks I've taken since. So I did change, but Stanford changed you. It started, you're around that culture and that vision of success, inundated by the examples of exemplary successes. And so you start to believe that, hey, maybe this is a path I could be on.
Let me ask you, when you were in New York doing private equity, I imagine the sort of PE profiles in New York are slightly different from that in California. And I'm also I'm curious what made you want to move to Stanford versus MIT or, for someone with your background, probably Wharton.
Or HBS, yeah. Interestingly, I applied to 4 schools and got into all 4. I was very grateful for that. And I actually chose Stanford. If I'm honest, I went to the welcome weekends. I won't name the other schools, not to offend anyone who went to them, but they're schools you would recognize. No, they're schools you would recognize, famous in the East and the West, and one of which you've mentioned. But I went to all of the visits, and what was really fascinating to me, when I was entering business school, I'm not sure I had a specific vision. A lot of people did. I kind of thought, what I really need is a break. I had been working for 5 years in banking and private equity. I wanted a justifiable break where I can say, yeah, there's a reason I was off for 2 years traveling the world and et cetera. But I also knew I'd get something out of it. I wanted that cohort of, business leaders and world leaders that are, I understood the gravitas of those top programs, but I had a view that I wasn't going to go unless I got into a top program. It wasn't there to get a finance acumen. I had one of those. I wanted to go there to get the leadership, the community, the powerful alumni base. I understood the power of that. And that's what I was after. But when I went to the welcome weekends of a famous East Coast business school in Boston and one in the West Coast, which is Stanford, I had very different experiences. When I sat in the welcome weekend, and I really expected I was going to go to the East Coast one, but I talked to people and said, why did you come here? What did it do for you? And I'm not kidding. People read me the brochure. Powerful alumni base. X% of CEOs in the world are from here. And it was a very honest and very deliberate businessy answer. And I think at the moment it was kind of turning. I'm like, yeah, I read the brochure. I know this place. Like the walls shake when you say Harvard. Yeah. And but then I went to Stanford, and I admittedly didn't know Stanford well. I remember my father never finished, high school. He fought in the Vietnam War. He was educated through technical training in war, and then he went to technical careers his whole life. When I mentioned I got into, I'll just say at Harvard, he was like, oh my God, you got to do this. I'll be so proud of you. This is amazing. When I was like, and Stanford, he's like, who's Stanford? Because if I'm honest, not a lot of people, it doesn't have the same recognition in the world. A street vendor in Mumbai knows who Harvard is. Not everybody knows Stanford. It's a different school. And I think I struggled with that because maybe some vanity, some fear of people not being proud of me. But when I went to Stanford, I asked repeatedly people, so why did you come here, and what choices did you have? And they purposely put you with people that chose between the similar schools. Not one of them mentioned the program. They were like, The cohort here have become the friends of my life. I met my wife here. One guy, I came out here. I felt safe in the only place in my life to do that. It was these deeply personal stories about what these people went through. And not one of them mentioned their job, their anything. It was a spiritual connection to the experience. Yeah. They were talking about how small it was, the community. They're even living in room. It was like, oh, I'm a roommate still with the people I was at Stanford. We're trying to figure out how to would it be weird to move our wives in and still live together? And I was like, you're starting a tribe.
Yeah.
And so that really moved me. Something about it connected. And then, of course, the entrepreneurial spirit, this sort of belief that maybe I could do it too. And that's what made me choose that. It was actually a really hard choice. I mean, of course, a very high-class choice to have to choose between great programs in the world.
Yeah,
but
first world problems.
Yeah, hugely first world problem. But that actually genuinely set me on a different path when I was there. I also, believe it or not, was a bit of a technophobe. I kind of thought, what's my deep insight? I'm not computer science engineering. I was never an early adopter of any technology or tool. I'd wait till everybody else failed and by the third generation and say, let other people with more money go experiment with crazy stuff. I'll wait till it works, and I'm sure it works. And so if anything, my dad was far more progressive. My dad was that guy when Fry's Electronics was a thing. He was assembling and tinkering with a computer with a little thing on his eye. And someone who far less formal education, huge technical aptitude. And he was at home all the time assembling computers and working on things and tinkering. And it was really interesting that when I went to Stanford and I told him all about this, he's like, wow, that's never been you. And I'm like, yeah, but Dad, I want it to be me. I'm going to work toward that. And interestingly, my second startup I worked at, Vents, the virtual fencing company, my father and I did what's called a teardown, where we bought every piece of hardware in the market that was anything like the attributes we needed in our product for our prototype. And I have pictures of he and I, before he died, us tearing down all of these products and inventorying all the components. And we use that kind of mapping every component and its behavior to then assemble and kind of our first prototype. So a teardown can often beneficially, you don't start from the beginning, you start from whatever the best microchip or processor or memory that someone else bought, because clearly they did their homework to choose this. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you're almost assembling from the pieces of standing on the shoulders of giants. Yeah. So I did that with my father, and I have a really neat photo of us early on when it was, at the very beginning of Events, when it was just me and him trying to tinker.
Was he a co-founder with you?
No. But I did, just before he passed, a chunk of the wealth that I had made from the exit of that business, I had transferred to him and to my stepmom, because I wanted him to know she'd be taken care of and comfortable. And I was like, I've signed it. I said, look, you remember this, showed him those photos and talked through it. So it was a really neat story, But anyway, the reason I mentioned that is that when you ask about Stanford or about entrepreneurship, I didn't know it was for me. I think a lot of people asked me, why not? You've met me, I'm sociable, I like communication, I like working with other people. I really like the concept of building things, but the big thing I struggled with is risk aversion. And if people are honest, I know a lot of studies have come out about this these days, but a lot of people who start startups are not that two people in a shed taking the risk on credit cards of their life. It's just not true. They're often from wealth, supported by communities that can help them. The bottom isn't falling into homelessness. It's falling back into mom and dad's house in the Hamptons.
Right.
And so I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And so
I think that was the student body for the most part at Stanford.
And at every one of these schools, right? With usual rare exceptions. So one of the challenges of entrepreneurship is, of course, that it is a massive risk. And if you have the support and infrastructure or financial means to bear that risk, if you fail, it's a lot easier than if you don't, right? Yeah. And I was one of those people that it wasn't until I had made some wealth and savings from my years of private equity, and you, of course, get well paid by the time you're post-MBA and those years after. But then I finally had hey, if I put 2 years into this, lost everything, I'd still be okay and be able to go back to work. And so that's when I finally would let myself off the leash, right? To say, why not roll the dice, if you will.
One of the biggest lessons that they do try and teach you at Stanford, at the GSB, is fail early, fail often. And a lot of the hard coursework would have been like improv classes to just fail in front of other people immediately. I assume you, and I've definitely fallen into this category, I think it's some of my Japanese samurai side, but I could do it if it was instructed, but in the case of coming out of Stanford and then applying it to business, it was so difficult to accept. I felt that the resilience of how quickly I get up after what I would consider a pretty big failure was too long. Who were you before you came into Stanford? Were you able to actually, while you were there, go, yeah, I did improve at accepting failure? And where are you now on that journey?
Good question. So maybe who was I when I went in? I think I was a bit a blunt instrument. I'm very hardworking. I want to be the best at anything I do. I'd rather die than fail, right? I'll throw my energy into anything. But I came in really not knowing where I wanted to take that energy. I promised myself I would do, even for example, an internship outside of finance and feel the waters elsewhere. And I did, for example, I actually worked in the United States government for my summer internship in a counterintelligence unit on the drug war. And because I had a deeply personal story of somebody that I loved who was muled, right, who was killed. And I said, I'm going to try and do something about that. What can somebody with a business acumen do about this problem? And so I wanted to just get out of so I really was testing the limits and challenging myself. Maybe I want to go into government or intelligence. I thought about like the CIA. And I then decided, I was a limited number of things you can do as an internship in that field, but this was pretty cool. I lived in Mexico City, fantastic international experience. And so what I would say is I changed in that I was being open to trying really off the cuff things. I did this huge global study program in India, traveled around India for a whole month, learning about and my first touch in agriculture, about the agrarian societies that live outside the major cities, microfinance. I could just tasting and touching the world, right? During school, I think what changed my openness, I started to become open and ask questions better. What I would say though is that I kind of became obsessed with the fact that I didn't have a big idea. So I remember I took a class, the first ever sales class that was ever offered in any MBA program to my knowledge, taught by this guy, Professor Leslie, who built Veritas, one of these great multi-billion fintech companies early on. He taught sales. How do you manage a sales force? How do you manage go-to-market strategy? And fantastic class. But I remember there was a day he asked everyone to raise their hand. Who here is going to be an entrepreneur? And I'm not kidding. There were like 55 people in the class, and I think all but 6 of us raised their hands. I didn't raise my hand. Then he said, well, you're all boring. I'm going to talk to the ones who aren't. Like, why are you in this class? And I was like, well, I realized in private equity, understanding the go-to-market and sales was actually a huge driver. He's like, well, that's a real answer. Why aren't you going to be an entrepreneur? And I was like, I don't have a big idea. And then he was quite surprised by that. He started challenging. He's like, how many of you have big ideas? Almost none of them. And I was kind of surprised. They were like, I'm just going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to figure out that idea part. For some reason, I was obsessed that without a great big idea, what was I going to go build?
I agree with you, though.
Yeah,
that was one of my biggest annoyances of being on the farm.
This gets to my risk aversion. So you asked what changed. What changed is I became more risk-seeking, and I became more open. What didn't change is I couldn't silence the investor mind. If I want to be part of something, I want to extremely thoroughly review the investment thesis, try to disprove I don't want to throw years of my life and other people's money into wondering if it's going to work. So I'm probably a bit OTT, right over the top, on the amount of work I demand of people, of myself, before you spend that first dollar and you take other people's money. And I'm a huge believer, you may have heard me say this before, that if you won't put your own money in, don't put other people's money in. So relative to your means, if you're a billionaire, you better put a lot. But if you're poor, just something, but you should take that risk alongside your other people. Because when you start putting your own capital into something, you start to think differently about, have I really thought about these risks? Have I really thought about the competition? Did I have an honest conversation about that? Because I think often there's this idea, I want to build a company, I want to do something, and they're not really thinking about the risks, and some of which could be quite knowable. And the final thing I'll say on that is something I learned at Stanford. I took a class called Formation of New Ventures. And in that class, they talk to you about graduation rates. What are the norms in the industry of how many companies start? But then they actually went into what are those norms at Stanford? And of course, it's a bit of a selection bias. They take in a lot of people who are already high achieving, meet every academic requirement, blah, 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 right? So there's a huge selection into a special group of people by achievement and attainment and history. But in addition, these people get exposed to all the right frameworks and all the right networks to go ask experts, et cetera. And I would say that if there was any one key thing that I caught on to is that you don't know what you don't know, right? When it came to entrepreneurship, I really realized I was the novice at this. Well, I had a great acumen from private equity and being on boards and being involved in things. When it came to building a business, I knew very little. I really did. So I tried to study. I call it back to the basics. I was the guy taking the Y Combinator, how to start a startup class, despite having years of business experience in a Stanford MBA. I was like, I need to build from the basics. I read every book I could get my hands on, lean startup, all the things everyone reads. But I think that's kind of required, right? If you want to go into this new field of taking a business from an idea to a successful business, at least start with studying how others did it, right? And I think that's something I've tried to get better and better at over the years. Ask for help, bring in advisors that complement your weaknesses. And I still try to do it. You don't see them all, but I would say that if you asked my team, do I have the humility to ask for help? I do. Why do I defer to experts in my team? I do. Like my master agronomist has forgotten more about how to grow a tomato than I will ever learn. So I don't sit here and tell him how to change his nutrient mix. That is his kitchen, cooking it. I only want the outcomes that I'm asking you to deliver here, right? And I've tried to adopt that. So I think when you ask what changed, I became more risk-seeking. I also couldn't change, though, this obsessive desire to de-risk and overplan, if you will, to try to minimize the probability of default or fail. But then I did start to say, ask the right questions and believe in people, trust them to do their jobs.
I think that's probably why your financial astuteness, your investor lens that you look at things is probably a big part of why you've been able to successfully raise almost $300 million, and sounds like it's that number is going to go up.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, very soon.
Never done till it's done.
Fingers crossed and knock on wood. Hey, if you really enjoy this content, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to know more information about any of the startups or investors that we covered, then go to www.lucidityinsights.com and look for the startup and investor databases that we've developed for you there. There, you can go and look up whichever investor you're curious about, search for them, find out what their average check sizes are, who's on their team, how many companies they've invested in so far, and you can do your research right there to see if they might be a strategic investor for you. For startups that you're interested in understanding their fundraising journey, you can go and check out our startup database. You can look up any startup in the Middle East and Africa. There's new ones being added every single day, and you can check out what their fundraising story is. And if we've recorded a podcast with the founder, you can find that there too. Hope you enjoy. But I want to ask you, maybe it's the PE background versus VC. Did you do a little bit of VC in?
Not VC in the way we would say it. I've done unprofitable early stage growth, but it was a company that had significant traction, was already raising $30 to $50 million. So probably late stage VC, early stage growth is about where I crossed over. That's below a $30 million check, we wouldn't engage. And it would be Sequoia, because there's an affiliation between Sequoia and Francisco Partners. 30 to 50 and on, it would typically fall to Francisco Partners. So I would say late stage VC, but early stage I hadn't, except for in my personal checks. I've invested in some friends' companies, et cetera.
And how many years were you at Francisco Partners?
3 years.
3 years. So altogether, you spent 5 years in the Silicon Valley soup. And I'm so curious, when you moved to the region and then, came across this Pure Harvest idea, which I want you to get into just briefly as well, why was this the one that you wanted to go for, considering that it's not a 90% margin SaaS company that you can scale quickly that, gets ingrained in you while you're in San Francisco, right? These are the businesses that make money, SaaS, fintech, et cetera. You went for one of the most capital intensive businesses you could build. Why?
If I'm honest, it was a mix of, I wanted to do something impactful. I wanted to build something. And I kept, the voice in my head was wanting to truly build something. I wanted to build a team. I wanted to build a company that you felt and mattered. And what really appealed to me, and when I knew I wanted to do Pure Harvest, was actually, in the first months, it was just a thesis on paper. It was a great thesis. I understood the problem. We import all our food. Water scarcity is a growing problem and now becoming a nightmare. I thought we're tackling huge problems. So that check, like big, meaningful problems. And I knew there could be a good business there, but I also thought that was an exciting thing, but personally and morally. But then when I started to check out, could we produce at a lower cost than comparable quality imports landed? Yes. So it started to check and scratch the investor itch of like structural economic storyline, right? This can work and have compelling economics. Like if you think in game theory, it can be strictly dominant, in which case it's just about execution. So I started to say, okay, I believe this can work and make money. But the thing that really sold me is when I went, Robert Kurtz, my co-founder, one of my co-founders, went with me and we went and toured greenhouses. And at this time, it was in the south of France, in Aix-en-Provence. There's high-tech, climate-controlled greenhouses growing there with extremely beautiful and high-quality produce. Optically, you wouldn't see it as very different than what we're doing. All the differences would be in the climate chambers and the technology, but the greenhouse and the vines inside would be very similar to what we saw here. And when I went inside of that, the feeling, you can feel you're surrounded by life. Like you can feel like when you're in a tropical forest, you can literally feel life, right? And cleaner air. There are bumblebees flying around because we pollinate with bumblebees. It felt like Avatar, like
so you're
giant
romantic.
vines. Yes, there was a romantic element of it, of like, I could feel you're going to build something, like physically build something. And I don't know, that strikes into some piece of the reptilian brain, some primordial man, I will build something. And I think I remember that scene in that famous Tom Hanks, scene where he smacks his chest. I have made fire, and I'm not kidding. That's what I felt, is that if you build this, there's something real and tangible. And I've heard people who talk about real estate this way. When they build, like I built a hotel, you stare at this iconic building and you build something.
There's a sense that there's something that's going to outlast you.
And what I feel is that was what I was missing in private equity. I loved the job, the intellectual, it's of course financially promising. You're part of building things, but I always felt separated from the team. I kind of envious of the team and their wins. Their win was more real than mine because they built something and hired people and did stuff. And then I add to that in the software ones and such, it's even less tangible. I do get excited when you build software and you can like open up and move a feature and fill in a form. But let me say that doesn't scratch the same itch as when you stand under a structure erected around you and there's dirt moving, and there's something about building stuff that was quite cool. And I thought that's something I want to experience. Now, will I do it the whole rest of my life? Who knows? I mean, I'll be honest too, I probably underestimated, Erika, the challenges. I mean, in my mind, it was get the technology right, build a brand, and get into the market. There were two big challenges. And that was way underestimating the challenge. There is a reason why so many players in the last 10 years who have tried to get into controlled environment ag of different levels of technology have failed. And it's a fascinatingly complex business. You're 6 companies in one. You're building 6 businesses, not just one. You have technology, either buy, build, partner, or steal tech, right? And to get the right tool. Then you're an engineering and development company, right? You're a project developer. Take the bare earth to the built environment. And that's, multiple contracts and managing that timeline, quality of works, et cetera. In disciplines, you're not an expert in all of them, right? You're having to navigate that and maintain capital discipline, ensure that people are not, stealing money, timelines are hit, get it built to work and operate. Then you're a farming company. You actually operate the thing. And you're on the edge of the biological limits. You're pushing, dosing CO2 to amplify the photosynthetic process. You're having to hit very high yields to cover up all of that capital that you absorb. So you need world-class performance out of the gate. Sourcing genetics from all over the world, trying to pick the right ones that will delight consumers and have the right production economics. So you're agronomical and economical study while managing that with fertilizers and a global supply chain, et cetera, right? Then you're a manufacturing company because it's literally just in time for everything with huge working capital balances. You're also dealing with perishability, which is the moment you harvest that thing, it is losing value in your hand, right? And
How quickly do they?
It depends
spoil?
on the product. A strawberry can be well done. Strawberry can be 5 to 8 days, max 10, depending on the genetics. And a tomato, for example, well done, can be 8 to 14 days. But imagine from the moment you've now spent a lot of money. I'm going to use a tomato. You built the farm, then invested in pre-production burn working capital for 8 to 12 weeks till it begins to harvest. Then you start selling, and your customers pay you the best ones in 45 days and the worst in 90. Think of that cash to cash cycle. So you have so much risk on that vine, right? That damn thing has to work. So the manufacturing side of it, inventory management, and of course, trying to multiple SKUs, primary packaging, secondary packaging, tertiary packaging, integrated supply chain, cold chain. It's a supply chain complexity, even more so than like a semiconductor company where you can inventory things. If a line breaks, you can pause the line and fix it. No, we have to maintain. We have to literally change the wheels on the bus while it's running down the road, right? And that's all. Now you're at the production, post-production environment, caring for it, cooling, the right designs, packaging design, your engineering, packaging engineering, innovating new SKUs. And then there's the go-to-market piece. So you're an FMCG company trying to understand what the consumer wants, working in a multi-channel, online, offline, multiple formats, multiple SKUs, and try to avoid SKU proliferation, launching new business lines like the jams and sauces, launching trading, leveraging your intangible assets in your supply chain. And last but not least, you effectively manage very complex relationships with multiple regulatory bodies. You're kind of a lobbyist. You're working directly with ministries, state level governments, federal level governments, and in every country you enter, it's different. You have to start all over again. The construction, the permitting, the requirements, and there's only pieces of the business that scale. So the minimum efficient scale to building this is extremely high. I tell people now, with what I know now, if you want to build a successful CEA company, you better raise $100 to $150 million. Be ready to lose money for 3 years because your first one's going to take time. You might get farm level profitable, but you got to build the infrastructure. You need all the systems and supply chain and everything all deployed to run one farm well. But you need many to absorb the cost of that. So what I realized is the minimum efficient scale is much higher than I ever thought. The complexity is much higher. But the benefit is, of course, once you've done it, the barriers to entry are much higher, but way higher than I ever perceived. It's why there's so few successful companies. We've been quite visible for many years. Many have tried to come and failed. And new ones are trying recently, and so far, to our knowledge, losing money. And it's challenging, And on the other hand, there's There's a joy in the being a survivor and working through that. It's also, of course, an incredibly demanding job. And for all my people, I credit my team, extremely resilient people. They have many options in their careers, but they choose to stay in this. And Lord knows this is not the easiest job, right? It has burned some people out. I've struggled with burnout at times. On the other hand, I think that, if the journey is harder, right, the victory's sweeter. I think we're quite proud of what we built.
And if I were to walk into one of your greenhouses now, would it feel like Avatar? How much of it is automated? How much are you using robotics? How much, I don't know if everyone's talking about AI integration. How does AI integration work in a business like yours to create more efficiency and higher yields?
Well, let me start with the first one. Yes, it would feel like the Avatar. The vines are thick and very extremely long. The plant's growing, 20 centimeters or plus a week.
And remind everyone what is growing in these.
So we're growing multiple varieties of tomatoes, strawberries, including Korean strawberries, interesting genetics. We're growing blackberries. We're also growing trials raspberries. We haven't yet made them profitable, but we're trying to improve the production methods there. We also do leafy greens, including spinaches, rucola. And we run a vertical farm that's doing a couple of things. It's doing Korean strawberries. It's doing different leafy greens that are complementary to our portfolio, things like the Boston lettuce or butterhead lettuce, stuff like this. And we're doing animal fodder. So we're trialing producing barley sprouts for dairy cows. So because right now they only eat dried feed and that affects them versus fresh grass. So we're actually trialing supplanting imported alfalfa and other, kind of nutrient-dense feedstocks as part of their total mix ration with fresh grown grass.
Is there a lot of cattle farming in the region?
There is. And
where?
In fact, Saudi Arabia actually produces in excess of its own demands, over 100% of its own milk needs and exports. You see brands like Almarai, right?
Yeah.
Here, Alain Farms, right, produces. So this region, the GCC actually produces an excess of milk. They have to dump some milk every year. So dairy is something that we're quite integrated into. And so what we want to do is make happier cows that produce better, higher omega-3 milk, and do so economically, because right now our region imports feed from all over the world because the region, smartly, the governments chose to ban alfalfa production or greatly limit it because it was using up all the water for relatively low value feed. Instead, they chose to import it. Ultimately, you had to absorb that in higher priced milk, but you protect the water. Now, what they were doing, though, is importing from places like Arizona, my homeland. Well, now, recently, last year, Arizona banned the export of feeds, and there's a huge battles in the courts. The water wars have begun. So feedstocks are now under attack. That will cause inflationary pressures in things like dairy and in meat. And this is going to become a continuing theme. We're wondering, can we use 95% less water producing a feedstock. If we can do so economically, it could be a huge opportunity. And the market there is far bigger than the market for tomatoes.
There's always been the sustainability angle as well as the food security angle, which has a sustainability element to it as well. And it's fascinating you're bringing up the water wars, because I remember 15, 20 years ago when I was a sustainability professional, we were talking about it like the next wars, instead of being fought for oil, will be fought for water. And I'm curious, what are these indicators? Where are we at on this? And how could, in a utopian story of pure harvest being the hero that saves the day, how could it be that player?
It's funny you say that. I'm a big fan of the hero's journey, right? The arc of a hero. Let me start with the water concern. This has been my linchpin issue for years. I have been saying that people have asked what will ultimately drive world-scale adoption of controlled environment ag. One, it is being adopted. Like, for example, in America, over 80% of the tomatoes are grown in some form of greenhouse. Over 80%. It's already being adopted. But what would throw it over the ledge and say that nobody grows in fields anymore is the day the world starts charging for water. We treat one of the most critical natural resources in the world like it's free. Iron's not free. Gold's not free. Agribusiness is the business of mining water. That's what you're doing. You move to a new plot of earth and suck the water out of the ground, and then you turn it into a good that you sell and export somewhere else, right?
But what do you mean where it's free? Because obviously people have a water bill. You mean it's not the right price? It's not priced appropriately?
It's not priced at all as of now. For agribusiness here in America, California, these water allocations, they pay nothing. These are legacy 170-year-old agreements cut with governments and Indian tribes in America and Canada.
Because food is so necessary?
Exactly right. They do not. You pay for water. Farmers, only in some economies in the world, pay for water at all. Most don't. As a result, what is the incentive to invest in water-saving technologies? The market doesn't pay you more for your produce than the other country. In a global commodity market, unfortunately, there's an element of a race to the bottom in terms of the lowest technically and legally acceptable standard of water consumption is what will emerge, because in the end, People look at 2 potatoes. They don't care this one saves water. They won't pay for it. They'll say they will, but it's proven people aren't paying for these things yet. We can say our tomatoes more sustainable, and people say if they can choose between the two at the same price, they'll pick it. At modest premium with better packaging and all, they'll pick it. But a bit of a premium to cover the cost of the packaging, don't pick it. Game over. So I have to highlight that that's been a real problem. To leave it to the market to solve this problem, it's not working.
It's the whole full cost accounting problem that for 2 decades now we've been talking about, making sure that we price things in and people pay for what it is.
And we're talking about it in carbon, but nobody's talking about it in water. Right. And we will die of thirst long before we'll burn from the sun in carbon. I hate to admit it.
Have you done some models where...
Not just me, the UNFAO, the IPCC.
How much would a tomato, how much would it increase your costs if you had to pay for water?
If water got marked to market, it's hard to know what the market value of water would be because, of course, in some places that are prolific rain, like Vietnam, it would be less. But what you would see is a shift in the global agrarian base, where things like rice would be produced where water's abundant and labor costs are low because it can be ground, stored, and siloed and shipped anywhere in the world. You would not be producing rice in Sharjah, right? Ever. And that's an example. Another example, though, so all of these water-intensive carbohydrate crops, soybeans and wheat, would pursue, essentially travel to where the production economics make sense and where water's abundant and available. And that would be a challenging thing for places like America. Hugely exporters in these, but many areas that are drought and water-stricken. And that's a problem. So you asked, where are we in this water? It's beginning. The Colorado River began in the last couple of years. People are now battling and revisiting 170-year-old treaties on water. Native American tribes are exercising their sovereign rights and they're storing water. And then it's upsetting the farmers downstream, but they can do what they wish and they realize it has value. Good for them. The Colorado River doesn't even make it to Mexico anymore. It used to run deep into Mexico, right? So we are changing the geology of the world already by the way we're sucking water off. And I'm using America as a good example because it's, let me use leafy greens relevant to my industry. 95% of all the leafy greens, lettuces, microgreens, everything are produced in 2 states, California and Arizona, both fed from the Colorado River. Field farming, water-intensive lettuces and leafy greens. If we produce almost 30 times the output per unit of water in our system. But
in your vertical farming,
no, it's a hybrid greenhouse. So we use natural light. It's here in LA. Natural light in a high-tech climate-controlled greenhouse with inside is what's called a mobile gutter system. So it's fully automated. You asked about robotics earlier. It's literally each row has a different seed implanted, and we grow multiple varieties through it, and it's fully automated from seed implantation to harvest. Only in the post-harvest is there any human intervention. So in this one little area, this is a 1.15 hectare farm producing 14 to 18 tons a week of production. So 25 to 30 times that of a field farm. So if you were in, say, Arizona, you could take a 30-hectare plot of land that's producing lettuces, take one corner of it, 1/30 of the space, build a 1-hectare farm, use a fraction of the water, produce all of the output, and sell the rest of the land for real estate development, right? This would be entirely possible. So when you talk about how could this go in the future, but what stops that from happening? The cost of production, it's much higher quality production, but the cost of production is higher. In America, you call it 20% higher. So somebody has to bear that cost. The way you could reduce that cost, make capital available cheaper. Because if the government decided to say 2% cost to capital for 10 years to build these projects on 70% of your build cost, that capital saving would result in maybe it's a 10 to 12% delta. So 10 to 12% premium for pesticide-free, ultra-fresh, grown locally produce, I think the market could bear that. But you need this coordinated action between the regulator, the capital provider, the land, the pushing of water, increase the price of water to essentially deter people from the free methods. Very tough to do. These are powerful lobby bases. Farmers that have these entitlements to water from 100 years ago fight for them. In fact, in many places, it's use it or lose it. They literally just run the water into the earth because if they don't use their water allocation, they lose it next year. This type of crap, and this is around the world. It's everywhere.
Does it happen here as well in the region?
They don't have use it or lose it, but they have free water. And so, and the government's talked about imposing and is seeking to put meters in place and begin to charge for water. Those who use municipal water are paying for it. But even then, it's at a subsidized rate. So they're trying to move it there. But I believe if you want to stave the water wars, you got to do this quite quickly. Over a 5-10 year period, say, it's a new world. I'm communicating to you the timeline. Get to better tech. Consolidate or die.
Particularly here, because my understanding is, and we've known this for many, many years, but the Middle East region has 1% of the world's freshwater reserves. So if it's going to hit anywhere first, it'll hit here.
Well, you ask why I built this and about meaning. I learned that roughly 70% of our water is used in agriculture, producing less than 1% of GDP for the region. and less than 15% of our food supply. What a critical waste of a natural resource. I gave a speech at the Wharton Social Impact Investor Conference several years ago called Peace in the Middle East Through Tomatoes. And it was only to get people in the room to ask what it was about. But I told a story of trying to, again, hero's arc about why this solution should be adopted as scaled and supported. This was 6 years ago or 7 years ago. And I said, there's two big problems. One, the water. And I told the story I just said. Here's all the water being used, doing very little. The existing production methods are unsustainable. And ultimately, we have, for example, there are many studies that in Alain, we have 8 to 11 years left of water. By the time my daughter's in high school, there will be no groundwater left if we continue on the pace we're on.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And these are the Alain UAE University and others publish these studies, right? That's just to use one example. It's not just here, it's everywhere. Yeah. But Saudi does have more water than we do. That's one. I was using that as just a tangible example of the risk. But the other risks are twofold. One, on water security. Once you're fully reliant on desal, it becomes a national security issue. If somebody bombs oil tankers on the Gulf, you poison the well. I mean, everybody relies on that well. Do you see what I mean? And you'd have to shut down.
Considering there's
given what just happened in Iran, right? Yeah. I just want to be honest. I mean, that was a concern. If nuclear fallout fell into the Gulf, that's our water supply, and we were supposed to be able to rely on groundwater, right? So that's a concern. And I want to highlight the government is doing thinking about this. Look at the recent X Prize, the biggest ever X Prize in the world, announced last year, $150 million solving water problems. But my frustration is it's only tackling producer side, more efficient technologies. How about we tackle more efficient consumption? How about we change the economic game of how water is consumed, charge more for it, force adoption of technologies?
The challenge I imagine with that, though, is if a forward-thinking nation like the UAE were to go, let's tackle this, it basically makes them uncompetitive because all of the businesses, for example, that are water-intensive would go, well, that's not a great country to be producing, and I'll just move over to Saudi Arabia.
But guess what? We have most of things rely on water and energy. We have advantages in energy. We have utility-scale solar power at sub 2 cents a kilowatt hour. We should go long energy and support the heck out of it, short water, and accept it. But a power or any manufacturing process, it needs a lot more energy than it does water, and needs capital.
But it does feel like a GCC. It needs to be a GCC initiative.
Yeah, coordinated. That's where this.
Just like the VAT.
We need coordinated effort, and that's really hard to do. And so, with great respect to our government, I think they're doing a lot on this space, a lot more than other places like my home country. But on the other hand, I would argue we need to move faster. I said a second problem, and I want to mention this one because it becomes relevant to everyone. It's especially relevant now with Trumponomics driving the dollar down. In my Peace in the Middle East Through Tomatoes speech, I gave a second cautionary tale, and it was this. 20 years from now, right now, the UAE and the entire region exports oil and imports dollars. We use that currency, balance of payments, that currency, to hedge, to peg the currency, which we've done beautifully for many, many years. That stability has led to many things in the support of our growth in real estate, us as a store of value, stability, yada, yada, yada. But it also does another thing. It stabilizes our imports in US dollar denominated goods, food, medicine, etc., right? Our people travel the world. What happens in a world where we cannot maintain the peg? If for some reason petrodollars decline, let's say, for example, post-peak oil demand, or instability in America, the dollar, if that currency changes, you have what you've seen in Turkey, Argentina, Russia.
Is that likely?
Yeah, it's inevitable. Eventually, we will not have the petrodollars, right?
Say more.
It's inevitable that eventually peak oil demand will happen. We all know it. It's just when. Now, when that happens, though, that peg will be challenging to maintain. When that happens, the currency weakens, prices of foreign goods go up in local currency terms. Now, if you're importing all your food, you're importing all your medicine, that's a worry. And so why I was giving the Peace in the Middle East, I was saying that is a recipe for hyperinflation or real challenge in fundamental goods that humans need, right? Food and medicine and health. And I think, though, now, before the water wars and before currency destabilization, is when you should be investing in large-scale food infrastructure in your local currency terms, local jobs. You get real economic diversification, and you benefit that you reduce that import dependence, that net exports payment. And you can do it over a 20-year period, right? Because Pure Harvest has decoupled food production from climate, and we've instead married it to energy, capital sources, and technology, meaning know-how and the right tech. These are all things this country has. We have the know-how, we have the money, and we have energy and deflationary forces in energy. But it would take a coordinated effort, right? You can't let Iran import tomatoes at 20 cents a kilogram and then wonder why your local farmer can't make any money, right? We would have to have a coordinated effort to solve this.
It's interesting because it also seems like Pure Harvest was created at the right time. And even I'm thinking about the COVID pandemic and the crisis. During that time, it was very widely spread that, I think 98% of the food that we consume in the UAE is imported from outside. And there was this whole talk about food security, starting a food security national office and a strategy. I'm curious, from your point of view, being part of that movement here, what have you seen in terms of making some real progress? Are we still importing 98%? How has that number started to change? And what needs to still happen?
So let me say, without a doubt, there was an immediate policy response in terms of getting the right people in a room and having big conversations, right? I was even part of, with Her Excellency Mary Mulmahary, the National Committee on the Adoption of AgTech for Food Security, very long name.
Who is the Minister of?
Was at the time the Minister of Environment and Climate Change that owned the food security file. Prior to that was the Minister of State of Future Food Security, right? That got absorbed into the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Now, that policy group came together with experts from all different, poultry and grain and fruits and vegetables and et cetera, and had big discussions. And out of that came a list of policy recommendations to the government. Now, what I would say is there was certainly some progress. One, I believe there is a clear and unified strategy on what are we going to try to produce domestically versus near or friend source. So have allied nations where we have strategic reserves and partnerships, and diversifying global sourcing. So there was a very deliberate, significant realignment of the supply chain. And you see that even in companies like ADQ buying huge Unifruti and Bakhawi and Safco, food trading and distribution. So the government and sovereign entities vertically integrated into the supply chain and having visibility and all. You saw that in Saudi's acquisition in Olam, right? So the region responded in that, but more in securing the knowledge of where food is, preferential access to that, and trading, which admittedly is a good idea. We can't produce grain and rice here. I just mentioned that, but you don't need to. You can have strategic reserves and silos. You can have 9 alternative suppliers and have preferential arrangements with each, right? To me, the right strategy. So a lot of good was done. But the pieces that I think maybe we could have done more were on the things where we can be competitive in producing domestically, and that includes controlled environment ag. We've barely made a dent. Fundamentally, the country struggles that, particularly in the summers, in the winter, when the climate is good in the region, we are the dumping ground of Iran, of Jordan, et cetera. A huge portion of our food coming from these countries who are able to produce at a lower cost of production. They have a better climate. They're also, in Iran's case, they want hard currency. They'll export at any price to get dollars, right? And because food and medicine are exempt from sanctions, right? So that's a challenge that a local farmer just can't beat. They have a higher cost of production producing here. You have to invest in a lot of technology and know-how to produce. And yes, it's higher quality, but will the consumer pay? So there does need to be policy response. Saudi's doing that. Saudi, for example, imposed a 15% import tariff last year on fruit and veg because they're trickling policy interventions to send signals to the world, produce here or be on the other side of this tariff.
And is that for Saudi, or is that as a GCC company?
Saudi, just Saudi.
Just Saudi. So
Correct.
as a UAE company, I know
If
you
we
guys
export,
have...
we do produce in Saudi, but if we export to Saudi, we pay a tariff.
Wow.
And if somebody else does. But what they're doing is they're trying to, in a
protecting.
coordinated policy, they're providing some protection to support the domestic development of the industry, which of course has multiple food system resilience, water conservation, real and tangible economic diversification, foreign direct investment, job creation, sustainable job creation, and good jobs. And you reduce the net exports. Instead of exporting your wealth and importing food, you stop exporting, you domestically consume, and there's a multiplier effect. It is real economic value. It is the formula of GDP being benefited. So Saudi, if I'm honest, has done a lot on this. We're still working on that.
My understanding with UAE is that generally they fall into that open free market strategy. Do you think that there's a time coming sooner rather than later, or at all?
For the first time,
tariffs?
I've heard dialogue of it, but
Really?
But I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm a free market guy, but not at any cost, right? I mean, would electric cars exist with free markets in America? Would not. We know it wouldn't. The only reason Tesla got off the ground was government subsidies and tax breaks, period. And now this movement of electric cars, Europe's support of it. There is a place for transitional, capital T, protectionism, transitional support and subsidy of industries. But what it can't be is heroin. It can't be something that gets people on it forever. I wouldn't want that for my industry. If the government started giving away money for people to adopt technologies, I would run. But if they start saying, we'll provide long-term project finance for 60 or 70% of the project at a subsidized cost of borrowing, but you got to bring in equity sponsors willing to cut the other check next to it and be subordinated, right? Take the risk. That's good policy. China did that, for example. China is the dominant producer in LEDs. There's a thing that produces LEDs called a metal organic chemical vapor deposition modules, MOCVD reactor. And China saw the potential for us to be a leader in this industry and put huge policy response behind it and provided 80-90% loans. And if investors came up with the rest, and then supported and guided them an entire playbook of how to adopt the MOCVD reactor.
They did the same with electric vehicles
in so many industries.
Yeah.
Why is that a wrong playbook?
Yeah.
Why is that a wrong playbook?
I mean, I think Saudi is now taking that page out of China's book as well. So they're doing exactly the same thing with electric vehicles.
When I won't even mention fruit and veg, Europe protects it. If right now we're looking in Morocco to ship into Europe, strawberries, for example, in season in the summers, are blocked. There's a tariff, and that tariff is aligned to the months of supply. Do you see what I mean? So if Europe can do it, so can we. Norway has a seasonal tariff, so that if Norway had no tariffs, nobody would produce in Norway. Too high cost of production. The winters, they can't produce anything. The summers, they produce beautifully. So what they do is they protect the summers and open the winters. Why can't we protect the winters and open the summers? Why not?
For all of the policymakers that are tuning in. Okay, let's go from the macro to a bit more of the founder story, micro stuff, because I know there's a lot of people tuning in and they just want to know, Sky, how did you do it? And if I look at just the amount you fundraised, how long you guys have been around, I think it's about 8 years now, right?
Entering your 8th year, yeah.
You're entering your 8th year. You've raised almost 300 million. And I want to hear about when you raised your first round about 8 years ago. My understanding is that you had over 30 investors on that cap table. And it's just something you just don't hear anymore, right? And so I really want to go back, let's go back in time. Sky, you've got this crazy idea, food security, it's solving these big, hairy, audacious problems. It is hugely capital intensive. How much money did you need to raise to just test it?
Yeah, for the pilot, we needed just over $5 million, and that included the capex to build, pre-production burn, working capital, salaries to launch the launch of building a brand and launch a launch event, all of that. So it's about $5 million to build an MVP, right? Which of course you can imagine was a challenge. Which
nowadays doesn't sound like a crazy amount, but 8 years ago in this region, that was a lot, especially when it was like, this is going to be an MVP, and it's literally it's a 50-50. It could die. You could lose all of that money. So how did you go about it? How did you, first of all, pull this together? I've heard you talk about just, being the super astute former investor that you were, really get nitty gritty. I know that you've put your own capital into it. How much did you put in of your own money to make investors feel comfortable? And then how did you go about identifying the right investors? Because it's so much capital. This doesn't sound like a VC play.
It definitely wasn't. I mean, if I'm honest, I started by kind of following the right playbook. I looked at the ecosystem of investors. Of course, one of the challenges is I couldn't target people who had done similar investments because nobody had, right? AgTech, asset intensive, onshore, first of its kind. We're sort of a tech-enabled consumer staples business, and we're sort of climate infrastructure. So we're sort of agri as infra. Who is the natural investor in that? So there wasn't, right? Just wasn't. In fact, I even talked to, at the seed stage, some of the private equity firms, thinking maybe this is more like development private equity, like what you see in coal gasification and solar infra. We tried that. That didn't work. Now, so what I ended up having was a very broad search of who might I be able to convince why this could be a scalable solution. Of course, it's capital intensive, but it would quickly graduate to private equity. It just needs someone to take the venture risk for the proof of concept, right? And that was how I positioned it and what I went after.
And what was the broadness of it? Were you talking to angel investors? Were you talking to high net worth individuals? Was it all institutional?
No, there aren't that many institutions back then. Literally very few. There were 3 or 4, right? So
check.
It was the institutions and it was super angels with credibility. I thought if I could get people to back it with credibility that had had success in the region, some of the names you would know, if I could get them, and many of them took a run at it, but ultimately didn't get there. But I was trying to find credible super angels that if they believed in it, could help me get the others across the line.
By taking a run at it, but didn't ultimately get there, you mean they really seriously looked at it, but then didn't put in a check?
Didn't put in a check.
Interesting.
And some have later told me they regret that. But it was tough, right? It was a tough sell. Not to mention, it was sort of I think some people may have even had a better appreciation than I did for the challenge of doing this here. Right. So I was kind of like, what do you mean? We're all smart and well networked. We'll sort this out. And I think they were kind of, do you understand what it's going to be like to build in this emirate, then that emirate, then Saudi? Do you understand? And I think the answer is probably not now. Maybe they understood the risks better than I did. But that was the strategy, was to start with anchor investors that would bring both legitimacy and credibility, to then go after the institutions, because I knew they wouldn't be an easy win. This was not a natural fit. Especially funds are smaller here, right? Even now, they're still smaller, but then they were much smaller. To get someone to put a multi-million seed check was unheard of. In America, that happens. In big, they have venture funds that are bigger than our private equity funds, right? But that's not the case 8 years ago, right? So what I started with was this well-planned strategy of anchor investors that would be credible, 10 or 11 of them, then go to investors that would be institutions, and then go fill it out in a global network of friends, family, and fools, and people that like the industry, right?
And how successful were you in executing that?
I got a few of those anchor investors that were credible. For example, I want to thank Magnus Olsson. He was an investor early on. David Scott, who's my chairman, who's extremely credible, had built the...
How did you find these guys?
Well, that's Magnus via Mahmoud Adi, my co-founder, had a connection to him. David Scott, Robert Kupsis had worked with him through some work through Condoleezza Rice, Dr. Condoleezza Rice. So David is an energy and infrastructure expert here, who now is one of the leaders of MGX, this 100 billion AI fund of the government. So it was people like this. So I got a few of those credible anchors, right, that were really foundational.
So did you have this, not a laundry list, but you basically made this star list of like, these are the people I'd like to have. One, because they had the capital to invest if they were convinced. But two, it sounds like you also were looking for strategic investors that could be very strong advisors.
And you're exactly, and legitimize the story. Like validate when someone says, like one of the questions I get, especially from international investors, what's to stop some sheikh from stealing your lands or what? And I'm like, that's not how things work. But try to explain that to an American who's only ever heard of whatever the news puts on right about the region.
National.
And who better than David Scott, former White House National Security Advisor to Middle East, North Africa, speaks Arabic and multiple dialects, senior advisor to Khaldun al-Mubarak at the Executive Affairs Authority, on the board of the Emirates Nuclear Utility. If there's a person who understands how government works here, he was one of the partners and responsible for architecting the Dolphin pipeline. So massive infrastructure, intergovernmental, and part of the Abu Dhabi government establishment. That was really comforting for an American wanting to put money in a business in a foreign land, right? So I was really strategic about these profiles. If I could get them on board, when I look at the risks that everyone's going to challenge me on in my business plan, I can say check, check, check. Another example, I went after a guy named Frank Boissonneau, who was the head of marketing of Carrefour. He joined as an advisor and invested. Thank you, Frank. And he was an example of validating the market. Would retailers buy this at that price? Well, why don't you talk to the guy who runs one of the biggest retailers here? And I went down the list. I'm not kidding. Validating market, government, risk, capital.
Give a few more examples.
Mahmoud Adi, our co-founder, was an anchor, Emirati national, Stanford educated Mubadala investor. Not only validated the investment as the private equity guy, his family put in the money to buy the land and then lease it to our initial farm, partly also proving this lease structure would work. We were also proving that technology. A foreign company leasing Emirati farmlands in a novel lease structure. And that was also a proof of concept. So everything had to be proven. The market, the land ownership and title and lease structure, and that it would be resilient to UAE law and a registrable interest. The technology, the production, the yields, everything. So this entire thing was a master planned proof of concept to check multiple things. And the early investors were intended to address the risks of somebody smarter than me needs to have told me that's okay. So another example, we got a gentleman named Peter Satau, who that farm I mentioned in Aix-en-Provence, running a high-tech climate-controlled greenhouse. He's one of the world's leading tomato consultants. He consults some of the biggest players all over the world. We got him to invest. And when people wanted to ask, and some of them flew out there and toured a greenhouse wanting to see it in France, he offered his greenhouse. So Peter was really helpful early on. So I was really deliberate about getting those proof points in.
I love that, because then investors can call and you know who to direct, and they've already got skin in the game. Let me ask you, beyond that, which is already a lot that these investors can do, were they strategically important for you going forward, or did they sort of just help you with the buy-in and credibility?
They were for different chapters. And you may have heard me advocate, but both boards and advisory boards should evolve with the business needs. For example, Frank was hugely helpful in the first year and a half. Once we had broken into retailers and he went on and moved to Thailand and was running a major, like the largest retailer in Thailand. We keep up as friends, but didn't need him in an advisory capacity anymore per se. Had done his job, opened up his Rolodex, whatever. David's still involved to this day, hugely involved in supporting the business in government relations, in strategy, and he's a governance expert, et cetera, a real chairman. They each serve a purpose for a period of time. And that's typically when you structure an advisory relationship, it has some, it should be very clearly scoped like any job spec. very clear vesting requirements, and then also termination provisions. Hey, this has run its course. We're going to take, the allocation of value for this and put it to that guy or woman for this next stage of the company's journey. So we've seen evolution in our advisors. Even now, by the way, right now, we are now in berries. We're doing a lot of trial and error in genetics, and it's taking too long. We want to go find a world-leading genetics expert in soft fruits, and we're now out hunting. We're out reallocating some shares and some capital to hire a berries genetics expert to help us in sourcing and choosing genetics for our trials.
Fascinating. Are all of your advisors investors?
Most all. We've had a few that either didn't have the capital or the appetite, but most all. Yeah, I mean, and even many of the employees. So a gentleman that works with us now, his title is Chief Sustainability Officer, but he works with us in AI, which we can come back to, and he works with us in policy and government relations. He's the former Deputy Director of the United Nations FAO, and he's a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work with Al Gore on The Inconvenient Truth. So I met him through the UNFAO. When he retired from that, we recruited him to join us 21 hours a week, right? He doesn't want to retire. He's a brilliant man and loves work. So he joined us, but he started as an investor and then recruited him to be an employee, and he works with us now, and that's an example.
These guys all sound very expensive, though.
It's interesting. We have unique arrangements with different people. So, for example, that gentleman, partly equity, partly cash comp, partly also, though, he enjoys UAE residency with his employment with us, and you can imagine how helpful that is to his tax bill back home. So creative structures and solutions.
I love this. What's another creative structure that you've offered one of your other advisors?
Another example was one that where we ultimately were providing a trip here every year for the family, and which was sort of a explanation of why this person was carving additional time out to convince the family of why a very busy person should give any time to a startup. Small cash stipend, stock, and then a trip out here every year with the whole family. So it was sort of sometimes it's not just money, right? People want to feel they're part of something, and they also want you to be looking at what their pain point was and that you're trying to solve it because you want them so badly. And then we try to do that.
And do you start off with this, or this sort of organically comes out in conversation as you're negotiating with them of like what's keeping them from joining?
It's deliberate. I would literally try to identify and assess what's the need. What would it take to recruit this person?
Interesting. So you already honestly, have it in mind.
Back to recruitment, I tell my team almost to their chagrin, I believe founders should be involved at least for the N-1, so they're N-1 and N-2, and any board and advisor, you should be directly involved in recruitment. Not even like passively, I'm the last interview for fit. You are responsible for those hires, because that tier of the organization, not only are making sure they have the right skill, competency, experience, and character, and values, but these are the people that are core decision makers and drivers. They're the leverage in the organization, right? So if you don't get those hires right, everything below is going to go wrong. You can't possibly be multiple tiers in the org once we're 600 people now. But you can, if you can't target the first top 40, what are you doing with your time? What that is more important than bringing in great people.
What percentage of your time are you using on hiring at the moment?
Well, at the moment, until we raise capital and build again, we're not hiring a lot, right? We're kind of relatively static. But across a 5-year period, I probably spend 3 to 5%. So it's 1/20th of my time across a 5-year period, because we also aren't hugely people intensive, right? A lot of our head office in every form in engineering, construction management, project management, growth, finance, legal, all of the, call it corporate functions, 40-something people, 43 people. Everyone else is in some operational function, pack house management, logistics, supply chain, the agronomists that are the people that actually care for the crop and do all the direct labor activities. So a lot of these people, of course, I'm not directly involved in, but in those top ones, I would be. And I think that's sort of true of most startups. They have our pyramid's a little larger because we have physical activity, right? We're moving goods in warehouses and et cetera, right? So, but I think that I spend probably 5% of my time. And that it can go up, for example, post a capital raise. We're acquiring a business or we're deploying capital. In those times, you have a bit of a period where you're doing a lot of recruitment or bringing things on. It can spike to 20% of my time.
Okay, got it. What do startup founders need to understand most about investors in order to really understand how they can secure that funding that they need?
I think it would start with understanding their mandate and their role within the organization. So interestingly, people will put a lot of time selling software to a bank. You put a lot of time in who is this person? What are their KPIs? Are they the decision maker? Everyone's trained really well in understanding that in an enterprise sale. Like that's what people selling B2B software do. But you ask a founder about the same about a venture capitalist, and often they don't know. Like, is this person a decision maker? At what level? What is the process of this firm to get from here to yes? Have they invested in your space? Are the investments in your space performing or not? All of these things will become relevant about how likely they are to be able to deploy capital in you, right? So I think that know your customer is the first part of it. And I know it's painful. We're all very busy doing all that research. You want to get meetings and like get meetings and get moving. But honestly, I find, and I've done it before too, been a victim of like, I've got to move. Taking all those meetings, driving to the meeting, prepping for the meeting is way more time than block one day and study the heck out of the meetings you do get. Yeah. And I think that preparation and that almost empathy is quite important to stare at the investor. What is their mandate? What are their check sizes? Have they deployed? How much have they deployed this year? Because funds are looking at vintage risk. Do I have 10 investments this year and none next year? It doesn't work. So that can help you understand how likely they are to be in a mood to cut checks. Then the second thing I think that is really critical, and a lot of people join my org and have said to me in the past, and I know like Bina Khan would say this, that people came in and said, man, you overdo it. You over prep, you over prepare. But then on the other side of it, I've been constantly told by investors, your data room and your preparedness is iconic. It is the standard of what we wish would happen. Why? Because I prepare everything I would want on the other side. And I know for my team, and I say this to those who listen, it's a huge amount of work up front. But my gosh, if you put that work in up front, once you're in the fundraising, it's impossible to go back and do it. So I would rather you lock everyone in a room for 4 to 6 weeks. Of course, they have to get their day job done, their business as usual. But you prepare the models, every output you'd want from the model, challenge each other of what every question, every trend, everything, chart it. Microeconomic unit economic study. What's the best? How do investors want to see it? Lay it out. Not only have your investor presentation, which is the table stakes for a conversation, but every claim made in that should have a supporting analysis. The team, a deep dive with every CV of the members. Market sizing, not just a chart with the market size, the research reports that evidenced it, the work you did to ground up, you should have the double click ready in a data room waiting before you start. Not only will that prepare you for every question you might get, you'll be ready to answer 95% of the questions on the spot. They'll be shocked how prepared you are. But honestly, you shouldn't be out raising money till you know those answers. You don't know those answers, don't go get people's money to figure them out on their money. So I believe that preparedness is quite critical. And so my advice to people, understand the investor, everything I said, but also prepare properly for that. And when you come to that meeting with a clear ask, here's the capital I'm raising, here's the use of proceeds and it broken down neatly, here's the people I need to hire to deliver that and the role you can have in helping me recruit these great people. Here's my thoughts on the comp plan and the options pool. I have thought through everything that needs to get us to the end. And do that quietly before you start the fundraising process. Once you're in it, taking meetings and you're getting Q&As and questions and calls and site visits, and it's hard. And then you have your core job, and then you have whatever's going to go wrong in the business. I think by the time then you are scrambling. And unfortunately, they're well organized. They typically have like kind of a playbook of how they process you. You don't have a playbook ready to process them, and that unfortunately makes you kind of a bad customer. If I'm in a deal and I'm trying to meet a timeline for an IC next week and I have to wait 2 weeks for you to get me an analysis on XYZ, your CAC economics, it's frustrating. I lose momentum. Deal now runs into my other deal's timeline, right? So I just want people to really empathize with the other side of the table. Ask yourself, how do I make you successful? Let's imagine you're in a firm. What do you need to succeed in this? How do I make this a partnership that I'm going to deliver, you're going to deliver me the capital I need to deliver my business, but I'm going to make you look smart for having done so, right? And try to think that way. You're not trying to trick them into yes, right? In fact, if you do, you'll regret it. You get money and it goes wrong. You want them to ask you questions that you haven't thought of. And that's healthy, right? Because then you're like, oh, that's a really good point. Let me work on that and understand it. The final thing I would say is, I know everyone talks about this, but on valuation, there's nothing that turns an investor off more early on than an investor who believes their business is worth gazillions and they're not even profitable. They've proven very little. And it comes off as adversarial. So I've even heard the word just recently. I had a luncheon with an investor who's new to the region, but a very seasoned investor. And he said that he had one of the words he used, most disgusting conversations he's ever had, where a founder was telling him what his business is worth, pay it or to get out, and he thought, I don't care what you do. I'm out of here. And he's out. He pulled out of the deal. And I just found that kind of bravado and hubris. Maybe if you're a 3 times proven founder, you can go, behave that way. But I would even argue then don't, right? It sets the tone of the relationship so badly. I think that people need to, they sometimes fall over on valuation. What you ultimately need is the capital to build your business. You need fair and reasonable terms. But if you sort of overprice yourself too, you've heard me say this, that can become a real problem. You then have a very high hurdle. If you miss any missteps, you have a down round, ratchets kick in, you destroy everybody, right? So a too high evaluation is just as bad as too low one.
And I think many of your contemporaries in the AgTech space have kind of fallen into this trap, right?
Not just in the AgTech space. Anyone who took money between kind of 2019 and 2022, there's a lot of cap tables that need to be fixed, where the companies are sort of working on the money they have. Maybe they took a lot, so they have many years to sort it out, and they are trying to get to the other side of being worth what they took money at. Yeah. But if they don't, they're going to struggle to raise, or they're going to have to take massive dilution.
Explain this, because I think a lot of founders do. Like, I think most people go, yeah, I want to be valued at the highest so that I can get the most money for the least equity that I have to give away, right? That's the sort of short-term mentality. But then the long-term mentality, because we know that the economy doesn't continue to go just up in a hockey curve, the reality is that there's bumps in the roads. What happens when there is a catastrophic event, whether it's COVID or inflationary prices,
or you just miss milestones, right?
Or
you're overly optimistic, which is the more common reason.
Right.
Rarely does the macroeconomy cause a fintech company to struggle, right? Let's be honest.
It's because the founders are too ambitious with their strategy.
Products don't get released on time. Competition has, and you misunderstood the sale.
Right.
The budgets do get affected within the client, so the sales cycle is longer, or they become more price whatever, right?
So take that.
It's
example.
more often in execution. Rarely is it the macro event that just becomes the reason.
That's interesting.
It can happen.
Yeah.
Macro events cause capital to dry up, but rarely are they the core reason that you can't deliver your milestones that you took money on in the last time, right?
So then, if you take the most optimistic view and you've burnt through your cash 2 years later, what is that founder facing? Why is that such a problem to have taken the highest valuation?
Because most, if not all, certainly in this region, all term sheets or financing terms include ratchets or anti-dilution mechanisms. So when and if you raise at a lower valuation, you essentially have to true up the investor to own what he or she would have owned as if that down round hadn't happened. So you don't only issue shares to your new investor for the amount they buy, which is usually at a lower valuation because realities are that, but you also have to issue shares to the other guy to make him indifferent, right? That's how these ratchets work.
And so you're talking about giving away a lot more equity.
A lot more equity. You end up in a much worse place than you would have been had you taken lower value and then okay value. You can. And so it can be really painful. It can be so painful that it causes big exodus in the leadership team. There's just, why stay? There's no money left. It causes you to re-engage. So I think that my ask of founders and of myself as well is to try to be really honest with yourself. When you take the capital, let's say someone offered me right now $1 billion terms. I have to play it forward with the money, $100 million at $1 billion valuation. I'm going to offer this person, 9% of the company, right? 1.1 billion post money, 100 million divided by. So what do I have to do in the business to make that person make a return? I know their firm's expected returns of them. That's pretty well published, right? What does my business have to do to make that successful? And if that doesn't look highly probable, you're stealing their money and you're just putting a problem later. You might get lucky. You put it all on black and you win. But more likely, you're creating a problem for both of you, even if the investor is willing to put money in on those terms, FOMO or excitement or necessity to get a deal done, whatever. So when you ask about what are the right terms on capital, I often see founders who haven't even modeled out how the investors make money. Now, I understand not everyone's got a finance background, but go find someone who does. If you don't know how it plays out for you and them, that's called the VC method of valuing. I'm at the Series A. I think I need a B, C, and D to get to the promised land, to the scale that then can IPO or whatever your plan is. Yes, you don't need to be saying, here's how I'm going to exit, but you need to model how this would work out if you deliver your plans. What are the milestones in the company? Have a view. Now, the venture capital firm is trying to do that on the other end. But if their assumptions are crazy and you know it, you're creating a problem for both of you, right? So I think that that's what it comes down to, is more about rational valuation, right? Does it make, let's say I'm Series A, does this 25 million pre make sense? Okay, with the dilution of the B and the C, does this A make a expected return? Pick it for an A fund, 25 to 35% IRR probably. I mean, it needs to be a minimum, and in this region, probably 30 to 40% IRR, because they're going to have a couple go bad, a couple go stagnant, and a few really crush it. And they need to be pricing to that return. If your model doesn't show that return, even if you succeed, they're overpaying, right? And so you're not helping them by taking this money. And that brings me to the other thing. And one of the things we had talked about in the past is, I think founders and board members, those who are sophisticated, should be proactive. If you see that train wreck coming, don't wait for it to come, wait for founders to turn over, or wait to have a conversation about, look, we clearly have a problem we're not going to be able to raise. We all know that the expectations weren't hit. There's a plan, there's an issue coming. Consider proactively solving it. Should we restructure the cap table? Reprice my capital as if it were priced at a rational level and just amend the security. But then that cleaned up structure, one, enables the company to raise again at a rational valuation. not waiting to price and then see the ratchets and all. But secondly, what does it show that new investor? You have a supportive and aligned cap table. You have rational people that are working professionally to try and protect the company to proceed. That's really encouraging. To come in with my new money and then say, I'm going to see the founders get practically wiped out. I have to have an adversarial relationship with the cap table. Do you know what that adds to my deal as the new investor? Risk. So now I'm having to decide, do I run to the end with these guys, spend money on diligence, get there only to have an uncertain dialogue with their cap table about what's going to happen? That's worse, right? So you, the board of the company that has taken bad money, are putting risk into your own financing. And what is that going to result in? You, the investor, probably having to pony up cash or let it burn, right? So why don't you remove that by everyone come to the table and be rational adults and talk ahead of time and say, let's put the company in the best position to raise. We both were wrong on that trade. I overvalued you. You took money at too high a value. You didn't deliver the milestones that made that true. Okay, let's both take a lashing here and let's come to a compromise solution that maximizes the success of the company raising.
I find this really interesting because, we talked a lot about how much time it takes to bring on the right people, do the research, how much preparation it is for the fundraising. And yet, your first round, you had 34 investors on your cap table. I'm curious now how many investors you have on your cap table. And does that mean that the more investors you have on your cap table, it actually sucks that much more time from you for those relationships?
No, it's not. It's diminishing. It's a curve that looks like this. We have about 147 investors now,
Wow.
ranging from small checks in the beginning to $80 million checks.
And have they all stayed on, or have you bought out some of the investors?
Only one had a personal crisis that we bought out.
Okay.
Just one. All are still here. Now, of course, some are looking for, we will consider a secondary after this primary raise, because some people would like liquidity. It's been almost 8 years, right? In fact, many of us, haven't taken a dime off the table, not one. Yeah. So that said, it is more effort with more investors, but there's a way to solve that, is that when they come in, you have an expectation. We will have a quarterly newsletter. We'll have an annual investor call. We'll have, this is what your entitlement and your rights are in your agreement and what you can expect of me, and then try to live up to that, right? If you do so, there tends to be that you're not too bothered. You, of course, inevitably have that nervous investor or that one who likes attention. But of course, you have to try and manage that. Look, I'm extremely busy in the business. I can't be taking calls every week. And as you get a team, it becomes, you share that responsibility. For example, now my CFO and I divide up a couple of the key investors, people with multi-million-dollar checks, to every quarter not only send them the update, but have a call to address their questions and all. So, but they deserve that. You took their money, you sort it out, right? And so, yeah, but that said, even at this, it's not an unbearable weight. Okay. I think it also comes down to the quality of your reporting, the openness of your dialogue, you know what I mean? Yeah. But I think that the way to protect that is good, organized information sharing, an agreement ahead of time of what that'll look like, and then maintaining that promise to the extent able. Inevitably, even us, an investor meeting will be late. For example, we're waiting for a big milestone before we release it because we don't want to release it and one day later have the milestone we want to, and then it ends up not happening. You say, okay, we just got to release, but try to stay within a month, right? Nobody bothers you to the day.
Now, is my assumption correct that if you've had 13 or 14 rounds of fundraising now, that every time you do a fundraising round, your share also gets diluted? Absolutely. And did you think you would have this many rounds when you started?
No, we thought it has been much more challenging to raise, even after the proof of concept and then the Series A. But there have been a number of challenges we faced. And on the rounds, though, those aren't all equity rounds. We've done, Abu Dhabi Investment Office grants twice, debt now a third time, so 3 rounds of debt financing.
And is that the positive of debt financing, is that you don't have the equity dilution in
Correct.
those?
And
is that why it's a preferred fundraising instrument for growth stage companies?
It is. Minimizing dilution, also just cost of capital. It's preferred because the cost of debt is less than the cost of equity. So you're trying to optimize your weighted average cost of capital. Mm-hmm. So as you mature and can have access to debt markets, using some debt is typically preferable, especially in an infrastructure industry. Now, what surprised me is how unavailable debt has been. For example, in Saudi, they have a fund called the Agriculture Development Fund. It provides 10-year debt at a very low cost with straight line amortization and a 2-year moratorium. So 2 years you don't pay anything while you build. That's extremely accommodative. We don't have anything like that anywhere else except for Kuwait. The Industrial Bank of Kuwait has an offering like this. So we thought something like that would exist here, and we have indeed been trying to pursue it with folks like the Emirates Development Bank. But to date, it's been very challenging. The truth is, that expression, pioneers take arrows, being first is tough. Getting people comfortable that this sector can be profitable. And also a lot of bad news in our sector. We have to take a lashing. The founders that went out there and raised, Plenty recently announced bankruptcy. $1 billion of capital raised from SoftBank and One Madison and Walmart. And they tanked the business. When it died, it had less than $5 million of revenue. $1 billion burned, right? That's tough because now I spend all my time explaining, why I'm not a vertical farming business that's going to go under. And also the other thing that's been a bit challenging for us, honestly, is that state actors have started to get directly into the industry. Folks like ADQ investing with Salal, folks like Nadec, which was our partner, but is also now competing, partnered with Salik, Topian via Neom. Now, again, to be determined whether any of these succeed. One already had challenges. Al-Dahra and Baiva partnered. We ended up acquiring that business in partnership with Al-Dahra. But Barakat had backed a farming business called Fresh, what's the name? Oh, it was open for 1 year. Sorry, the name's slipping me. But they opened 1 year and then went under because struggled, not the right technology, couldn't get it profitable and operational. There have been failures.
You could say that there is a first mover advantage as well. You've got, 7-8 years on these guys. You have already significant backers.
Market share, powerful brand.
Yeah.
But without a doubt, though, people fear, what's that expression? They can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So the fear is that when you have state-backed companies, they have an unlimited access to capital at a very low cost of capital. That is a concern. So fairly, investors have been very focused on that. They've been saying just two things I've been spending all my time explaining. No, I'm not one of those flash-in-the-pan vertical farming companies that will lose all your money. We're a real company with a brand, profitable, et cetera. And number two, yes, we still are going to be able to compete despite these state-backed entities entering the game. Eventually, hopefully we partner with them, right? I mean, that's a path to consolidation, but that's been the two challenges we faced. Our core business, profitability, the team, et cetera, check. So it surprised me. You asked about 13 raises. I thought all these years later, I'd be fighting money off with a stick. Instead, it continues to be a challenging piece of the business, broad investors engagement. So despite all my advice, it's tough to stick by it because we have a very focused investor effort targeting these players, and still you got to shake a lot of trees to make it happen.
So for those of you out there who think Sky's job is pretty easy, because from the outside it does look like you guys have such an easy story to tell, and I think just you sitting here saying what you're saying is indicative of you can have an amazing success story, and it is still difficult to find the right financiers and investors for your business.
I think it's true of any success story, particularly in this region, if I'm honest. This region is, we're pioneering, we're breaking new industries open. When I look at Kareem, on the surface, it looks like this dazzling success story. Any one of them, if you talk to them, they've had challenges. They've had regulatory challenges. They had almost running out of capital at points. They had battles with investors. They had, Braj going under, which was a key shareholder at the time. They had, entering Saudi was its own unique animal. Their relationship with the RTA was a unique animal. There's been a lot of complexity in that business. And so I think that, it is a challenging place to build something big and new. On the other hand, the returns to doing so can be substantial too, right? You really are breaking open new industries. Your access here to collaboration with the government is unparalleled, right? I mean, the fact that you have ministerial engagement directly, support audio, for example, existing. That's a fantastic organization providing real money to help companies scale. And so there is a lot of help. There's also a lot of challenges. And I think that's one of the complexities of building a company here that I didn't appreciate. I've really said to Jan Prins, who's our master agronomist and has been with me from the beginning, I often say to him, man, I have been humbled. Being a farmer is bloody hard, but doing so in an emerging market where historically, farming didn't have a great track record, right? It's a subsidy-ridden, low-margin, unexciting business. And when you're trying to convince investors and governments that, no, this can be like it is in Canada and Holland, and we're doing that. But little did I know the lift that would be.
Tell me about your thoughts on unicorndom. Dubai and the UAE have a target to have 20 to 30, depending on what you read, homegrown or transplanted unicorns based out of here. I know you've been on that sort of journey, and Pure Harvest has been quoted as being a soonicorn for a very long time. I would love your perspective on what you think it would take to become a unicorn, and how difficult or easy do you think it will be for Dubai to reach this ambitious target by 2030, considering many, what should I say many? Well, we've had a few examples, let's say, of homegrown unicorns that have relocated to Saudi just because of market dynamics and the size, and those that wish to IPO in Saudi. Thoughts on sort of that unicorn story?
Well, let me say for domestic homegrown companies, it'll be challenging because the markets just aren't that big, right? We don't.
You mean if they only stay as a UAE right. company?
Or even regional. 57 million people isn't a lot of people. Like I say, let me use my company as an example. Our entire fresh produce market, 100% of it, isn't equal to Texas plus Arizona, right? If I had 100% market share, I could be a bigger company operating in 3 states in America, right? So it's just the reality. We're in the business of bellies, and there aren't that many bellies, right? And so that's an example of
in the 57 million, you're referring to the GCC.
GCC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when you talk about MENA, you start to get to a bigger market, but you also talk about a lot of complexity, regulatory, different languages, different dialects, different cultures. So whether it's a software, a t-shirts company, or a produce company, the scalability of businesses here is just less. They are not as scalable as they are in much bigger markets, right? Now, that doesn't mean we can't have them. Look at Emirates Airlines. I mean, Decacorn. Look at Huda Beauty, right? Went global. So companies here need to be globally relevant. And I don't say global, like international markets, South Asia, Europe, Africa. They need that, period, to build true billion-dollar companies, because the domestic market's relatively small. Only some sectors, I say domestic, GCC market is relatively small. Only some companies where that's big enough to support such a business.
What do you think about Jahez, Ninja? Ninja just became the next unicorn in Saudi. What do you think about these businesses? Are they real unicorns?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to see if the fundamentals support it, right? I mean, and my belief is they're counting on, and their investors are counting on their products to get outside the GCC. They have an international expansion mandate. And because I'm just saying the market size limits you to some extent. Number 2, I do think, though, that attracting foreign companies to come here or headquarter here who are already global, bringing their businesses into the region and using this as a home base for international companies in the way, say, Singapore does, absolutely. So I think it's got to be a combination of both. Now, what I will say, you asked about for us, we're already looking to bigger markets, right? Our desire to be in Morocco is to Europe what Mexico is to America. We want to access providing our quality of production at a lower cost into the European markets from Europe. But the pro forma company is EMEA. We are really Europe and Middle East. We're accessing 500 plus million consumers that eat a lot of fresh produce, and we're accessing the 50 million that we're trying to teach to eat more fresh produce, right? So that's how we would get there and how we intend to, but it's going to take a bit of time. And because just again, limits of the market size, also of driving adoption of, in our case, premium quality fresh produce consumption. We're doing it, but of course, to justify $1 billion valuation, right, you need to be high. Typically, these businesses should trade, if it's growing well, at 14 to 16 times EBITDA. So you just do the inverse. You need to be 70 to 90 million of EBITDA. So we still got some years to go.
A few months ago, I sat down with Rabia Khoury of MEVP, who goes by VC Yoda in the region, but his title is actually Chief Exit Officer. And he had said something about, no matter what stage your startup is, even if you're literally getting it off the ground, you should always have an exit in mind. And I'm so curious, what do you have your eyes on in terms of Pure Harvest exit strategy? And has it changed over time?
Interestingly not. I had my exit in mind from the beginning. Maybe, again, the investor in me. I've never agreed with that whatever conventional wisdom that ran around for a while of like founders shouldn't be thinking about their exit. They should be thinking about building. You remember this? Right. Then you're taking people's money where your entire theory of giving them their money back is that you exit one day to return their money.
Right.
So you should have an idea of what that's going to be. So sometimes I find there's this like or wisdom that trades around in startup ecosystems, and I always wonder where it comes from because it just sounds silly to me. And that was an example. You absolutely need to have a view of how your business would exit one day. Otherwise, literally, how are you going to return capital to your shareholders or to yourself? You will never get paid. You'll build this thing for the rest of your life. And so I do think you need a theory on who would acquire this, or is it ever going to make a public scale, and on what market?
So what's your theory?
For us, we've always had a belief that we would do that we control our fate in an IPO. We may have a strategic that would like the business, and we will run a dual track process to keep both markets honest. So
who would be interested?
Strategics in the region, right? I mean, the sovereign consolidators, that could be folks in Abu Dhabi, that could be folks in Saudi. Also, there are sovereign-owned food companies in the region, subsidiaries of IHC, subsidiaries of ADQ, subsidiaries in
So those that would be looking to vertically integrate.
And own a fast-growing branded regional champion, right? That's one option. Another, we have been approached by international investors, FMCG companies, thinking about, should produce be a new FMCG category? To me, that makes a lot of sense. Nestle, if you're listening. I think it makes a lot of sense because they don't have a lot of growth in their core categories, super saturated categories, and we are proving a brand could be built in an entirely new category that's massive. Typically, fresh produce is 17 to 23% of a retailer's revenue. How is there no FMCG in it? Right? So I think Unilever, Nestle should be thinking about this, and we're a perfect player for that. You see us launching consumer products, right? Jams and et cetera. Exactly. Yeah. Now, the final one is international consolidators in controlled environment ag. There are huge players in markets like Canada, Mastronardi, Mucci, that are billion to 3 billion companies, that international markets would be a new growth vector for them because the North American market's very competitive and very mature. So taking that capability and know-how into international markets with their low cost of capital could be really interesting. So
going into year 8, have you been talking to any of these? Even if
we've been approached
lightly?
at certain times, but it's been early, right? We only just turned a consolidated profitable Q4 of 2023. And then Q4, 24 was our first true consolidated profitable year. And then 25 will be much more meaningful. So, because we had high minimum efficient scale, the cost to be us of marketing and finance and technical was very high, and we needed more farms. And now we're crossing to the other side. I call it the event horizon. You know, the line around a black hole, you get sucked in. We've crossed the event horizon, and now we're out into space. And every incremental farm makes us more profitable and more resilient. But now it's about securing capital for the next phase of growth, right?
Congratulations on passing that point.
That event horizon. The black hole sucking us, companies like mine in.
Now, let me talk to you about this period that you've been in, about scaling well. So you're definitely no longer an early stage. You're kind of heavy in the growth stage, and maybe even the later stages of growth. And I want to talk about the 5 different ways that you can grow. And I think you guys have basically done all of these. So the first would be a geographic expansion. I understand you guys are in Saudi, Singapore.
Saudi and UAE producing. We export to Kuwait and Oman. Okay. We've secured land in Singapore, and we're looking at an acquisition in Morocco.
Okay, and I've heard you even talk about the Maldives.
Yeah, discussions. We don't have any land.
Okay.
We actually are being approached. One of the great things is, as you get bigger and are more well-known, we're being approached by a lot of parties saying, I'd be interested in that capability here.
Interesting.
So it's something we'll entertain. The challenge, though, it always comes down to capital. Can they fund the project? If not, we have to go run a fundraise to fund the project, right? And so that's, if we had Dream World, someone would say, here's $1 billion, call me in 10 years with a $3 billion company, and I would be able to do it. But the challenge is you have to go line up the projects, say, hold on, I'll be right back, run to the capital markets, hold on, I'll be right back, and then try to deploy it and pray the currencies haven't moved and the assumptions haven't moved and commodities and interest rates. And it's a stressful way to build an infrastructure company.
Interesting. But yeah, that was probably your first move with geographic expansion, because UAE is just too small with 10 million people here. The second was product expansion, so growing additional fruits and veggies. You started out with tomatoes, and then you've already talked about all these berries and these Korean genetic, who knows, strawberries.
And we literally expanded into multi-country, multi-crop, and even within those crops, multiple SKUs, right? So we have over 56 SKUs. So we have, which is, the product is an actual SKU, right? So we actually are able, for a relatively small company, we manage a huge amount of complexity, because you can imagine every SKU has packaging, post-production standards. You're having to produce them in line with demand, huge supply demand forecasting.
I'm actually surprised you only have 600 staff, actually, considering all of the things that you guys do. I'm also wondering, have you guys reached that, not just the minimum efficient scale, but have you reached that maximum efficient scale, do you think?
We definitely not. We will gain immensely in the next wave of just our fixed 2 years out from now, building, almost doubling our own built capacity and acquiring a business, and our SG&A will increase by only 20%. So we will, nearly 2.5x.
SG&A being?
Selling, general, and administrative expenses. Corporate overheads in all forms. So we will more than 2.5 to 3x the business and need very little incremental.
Wow.
So it's very scalable from here. And the challenge is we need that next wave of growth to absorb that, because the farm level EBITDA margins, the farm level economics are quite attractive, but you need, for the consolidated economics to work, you need to keep leveraging those overheads. You're paying for an ERP system, whether it's on a few sites or many. You're paying for all of the systems and processes. You need a team to maintain the software we've developed, right? So there's operating leverage to this. And so we're only now beginning to scratch the surface of what the benefits of scale will do.
Right. And then the other area, ways in which you can scale is horizontal expansion into adjacent products. So you've already mentioned tomato sauces and jams, which I haven't tried yet, but I'm super excited to. I should have brought you some today. I'm so sorry. I would have loved it. But no, that's fine. I'm off on summer holiday anyway. The other one you've already mentioned is M&A, and I want to talk about it. So that's the only sort of inorganic growth. And people could say, yeah, you can grow really quickly that way, but it's also really a struggle to bring two different businesses that are managed very differently together. And it doesn't sound like you're just doing one acquisition. It sounds like you've done two
already. This is our third.
Right. So I want to hear a little bit about that as well. And then I'm not sure if you've done this, but vertical expansion, as in maybe getting into the delivery and logistics side of it and owning some of those elements, or even down to potentially the retailer. So I want to understand how much of what you guys have already done. I mean, it's a lot here. Geographic expansion, growing all of the crops that you think, and I'm sure you guys are still testing out with data, what sort of crops to bring in at different times. these amazing low cost but new business lines of the tomato sauces and jams.
And we also are doing one other line, which is what we call Pure Harvest Selections, where we partner with farms, select really high quality farms, validate their processes and labor controls, and ensure they align to our values. And then we'll trade their products into the region. So we call it selections, where we select farming. We're doing that in avocados, pineapples, grapes, blueberries.
Is that kind of the same as like Waitrose or Spinneys having their own select line?
In a way, yes, because they source directly when they do that. Yeah. But what's different is we put our brand on it. It's a different, you'll see the package is different color. So Pure Harvest Smart Farms is farm grown, our farm. Pure Harvest Selections is other farm grown, our brand, and our cold
and are
chain
they
and
always
quality control.
local?
No, it depends. Some are Morocco, Ethiopia.
Okay.
We're also sourcing in Rwanda, South Africa. So it depends. Some products, like for example, a blueberry, you can grow it locally and seasonally, but not great production economics. Whereas it's far better to source in, for example, in Morocco. And so it depends. We're still we continue to be, we want to be local for local or regional. However, we have to acknowledge realities of economics, water availability, capital availability. So we always will work to localize everything we can, but not everything can be or should be localized. Like pineapple should not be grown here.
Yeah, as rice and all of the other things we've already discussed. So out of all of these growth levers, which ones are your favorite and why?
Well, what do I love? I mean, I love building great products. So the value-added products that we've launched, including we launched with House of Pops, a strawberry popsicle for the summer, available on Noon. And have a check. It's awesome. So our strawberries integrated with House of Pops production, branded Pure Harvest, and it's exciting. I love these products because one, we want to make just superior award-winning products. And we've done in every product category, we've won product of the year it's a Nielsen test they do 4,000 or 5,000 people independently testing. And every single product we've done, we've won that award. And I have a view, both as an investor and as an entrepreneur, if you make wonderful products, there will be a market. You will find a market for it and it will work. And that's what we try to obsess over. So I love those. I would say the initiative that has been delighting both our customers, our retailers, and consumers, that is actually been a real surprise, its rapid success, is selections. People wanted us to they trust our brand, they trust our quality, and they wanted us to have a broader assortment. We often get messages, why aren't you growing these? Why don't you grow that? But we can't. Like, if I got unlimited capital, I'd be growing a lot more things, but we have limits to what we can do. The boxes are full. So it was a way to delight consumers and bring them great value, and that they trust the quality when they're buying. Like, if you haven't tried our blueberries, they're epic. We're sourcing really wonderful products. The grapes also are really good. So I think that's the other one that's been really exciting, because it's also been, both of those are eliminates waste. We're using the ugly tomatoes and strawberries, into shelf-stable branded premium goods, so we can store them, inventory, sell. That's margin enhancing, but also good for the world. And I love that about the value-added products. But the other one allows us to grow more revenue on a fixed cost base. So it's capital light growth. And that's been a frustration, that we couldn't grow if we didn't have capital. You're stuck in the box you're in, modest price improvements, mix improvements, margin improvements, but you're just kind of stuck. And that's one of the frustrating things about the business, is limitation to scalability. Constantly capital is our limiter. And that's what you miss about software. You could just sell more, provision more software, very limited capital. Here, it's these lumpy step change growth, right? It's agriculture as infrastructure. And again, I thought by now the taps would be open and capital would be available. It still isn't. It's still hand-to-hand
all of those
combat.
capital holders out there listening in.
Please do. Send me your checks. Well, it's one of the reasons we thought about being public sooner be better. Now, we're still too small. But I believe, and I'm curious the feedback from people, wouldn't the consumers love to own a piece of the company they buy every day, right? That I think it'd be I would love the idea. And we thought about crowdfunding at one point, but having people invest in, like, I am a proud owner of part of Pure Harvest, enjoying the profits and the dividends of it while buying its produce, while evangelizing its produce to everybody, right? I really, now, unfortunately, we've talked to the exchanges, we're still too small. But I think in a year or two, could that be possible? And I would love that I'm accountable not to private equity guys, but to the consumer. The customers own me and they're my boss, right? There's some, especially in a region as concentrated there's some beautiful parallel to that. My shareholder calls are the very people I'm serving every day, right? I would because we have a lot of retail investors in this region. So for a consumer brand that's mission driven, I really like this as an idea, and I'd like to be owned by my customers and consumers.
I can see the romantic in you still alive and well.
It hasn't beaten it out of me yet.
We're coming to a close now, but I do have some 2-3 burning questions. So if we can keep it super short but clear, I would love that. I want to understand how your role as CEO has changed from when you were building the business to how it is now. And what I want to hear is sort of the breakdown of your day or your week or your time. So what percentage of your time were you spending on X, Y, and Z before? And what are you spending your time on now?
Well, let me start before. I was almost chief of stuff, right? I wore sales, project development, technology sourcing and system integration, government relations, capital raising, and then divided up with Majid Halawi was my number 2 at the time, and then my grower was the grower, but he was in project manager. The 3 of us divided up every function of the company. So hard to say what my day looked like. It's whatever needed to be done to drive the business forward, but a lot of time in commercial, setting up systems, raising capital, managing stakeholders, a lot of that, and recruitment. Then in the middle, when we started to be a real company and have start to employ and bring in functions, I started to change to that founder CEO, still a founder-led company where I was directly involved in all the meaningful big business development partnerships, big deployment of a system, big procurement, and we have a procurement committee and driving the committee, driving investment decisions. So I was sort of still doer and starting to step back though and more start to lead through others, one-on-ones, engage. We deployed an OKR system, being the owner of OKRs and goal setting for the year, strategic planning starting to be more formalized. And that was the middle. Now we're at the very end of that stage where I'm trying to come out of that. Now, I ultimately got pulled a little more back into it. My COO, about just last August, resigned, had to go back to America. It left me now COO and CEO. I'm running both jobs.
Wow.
Now we have a person lined up, but only after this capital raise to bring them in. If not, I can continue to run it as it is, and that's an expensive headcount. So I'm sort of coming out of that founder CEO thing where I'm still a heavy doer. I'm in the core projects of the company, big partnerships, capital raising, very much leading, partly because of my background, partly investors want to deal with the founder CEO. They don't want to be relegated into the organization. So I'm still coming out of that and trying to mature out of that. But where am I trying to get and where do I think I will in the next 2 years? Harvard Business Review produced an article years ago where they did the most comprehensive study of CEO's time. I think it's called the CEO's calendar, or the leader's calendar. Google it. It was done by Michael Porter. And what they did is followed 15,000 CEOs, tracked their time at 15-minute intervals with their EAs, and then did a study. How do CEOs use their time? And then how does it correlate to success, the stock price movement of the company? I literally tasked my EA, her name is Fetus, Rehan, that we study that, revisit it every quarter. How am I aligning to the CEO's calendar? Because it was a blueprint of what success looks like, the complexity of your job and stakeholder management, internal, external projects, et cetera. And I am trying to hit that calendar. It recommends a 55 to 65 hour work week. I'm well beyond that now. I'm trying to get back. It recommends fitness, yada, yada, yada. So when you ask, where am I trying to get? I'm probably 10 to 15% off of that calendar, still a little too involved in day-to-day things, still deeply involved in owning a few projects, that in the next phase, I hope to make that final transition to a real CEO where I need to lead through people with clear objectives-based management, support in vision, strategy, culture, key hires, but also let back a little. I also need to do that for myself. I can't continue to operate at these hours.
Yeah.
And it will kill me. It will burn the company out. So I think that I'm sort of in inning 7 of becoming a real CEO, but I am very open to change. One final thing, my EA, 30% of her OKRs are related to my personal OKRs, me managing my personal life, dates with my wife, time with my daughter, putting my daughter to bed. And Fetus would know this.
OKRs is?
Objectives and key results.
Okay.
So literally I have both professional and personal OKRs, and she's partly accountable, and her compensation is tied to me hitting my personal ones.
Wow.
Because in the end, I have a person who helps me manage my time. And if I'm not putting those as priorities with her, they'll never make it into my life. So I'm actually trying to be a better person, which will make me a better CEO.
So that's my final question for you, Sky. How are you managing this work-life balance, and what are these OKRs when it comes to your personal life?
I actually could pull up my phone and show you. So let me say, how am I doing? It's been a challenge. When you're raising capital, acquiring a company, dealing with fires, et cetera. And then I've also had some personal challenges. I think I told you my mother died this weekend, right on July 4th. And so I regretted I couldn't be there, and it's tough. I'm still making very significant sacrifices to do what it takes to deliver this. And so I would say that it's been challenging. I keep believing it's going to be easier, and it never gets there. 2 steps forward, 1 back. But I'm putting direct intention into it. And I have, for example, my EA helping me. I have my family supportive of me. They know what I've given to build this. And my team, people work really hard in my company, and I have to be grateful for that. But what am I doing to balance it? I'm trying to make fitness a priority. So on my OKRs, I have one that's personal. It's like be a better husband, be a better father. And then I have specific results on that. Put my daughter to bed 2 nights a week, take her to school 3 days a week. My wife, a date night, not less than once a month, because we weren't doing even that. So I have specific like KRs. Another one on fitness, minimum 2 times a week to the gym. I try to make 3. I never really get 4. It just doesn't happen. I don't know how people find time for that. I sometimes have to choose see your daughter or go to the gym, and I'd like to see my child, and I can't get that time back. I can get fit later. So I have very specific ones related to family and self. Another related to managing my personal affairs. You ever hear the mechanic's curse? A mechanic never has a working car. I'm like that, where I'm a professional investor who's never deploys my own money and never has time or energy for it. I'm bringing on Julius Baer, a wealth advisor, to help me manage my personal affairs. So I'm trying to make that a goal, sorting my will. So like, what if I get hit by a bus or had a heart attack? To make sure my wife and my daughter are cared for properly in my family affairs while dealing with the stuff like death at home. So I am trying to fit all that in. So my personal OKRs are related to health, family, and then sorting my life out and making my wealth work for me, not me work for my wealth, because I don't want to work this hard the rest of my life. So that's kind of what I'm doing. But I think that ask any CEO, you always feel like you're a failure, right? I feel like I'm failing on every dimension. I can't get anything right. But what I am trying to do is be deliberate. I think if you can't do everything well at once, it's like a sundial, 2 or 3 things at any given time, and then just shift which 2 or 3 you're focused on, right? And I think that becomes a more manageable way to live and ultimately results in a better you.
I love that. Sky, thank you so much for your time, your candidness. I'm always taken aback every time I get to hear you speak or get a chance to talk to you, not just about your business, but about life. I think you do have that. I don't know if you had it before Stanford or not, but there's this humanity to you and this humility that you have, considering this massive, massive business that you've built that I hope you're really, really proud of. And I'm sure your mother and your father were as well.
Well, thank you. Actually, it's sweet you say that. I know my mom, one of the last things she said to me, I spoke to her last Monday before she passed, and she was telling me how proud she was. I was asking her, should I come visit? And she said, no, I'm just sleeping on painkillers every day. Come when this is done. I know what it means to you. I'm so proud of you, right? So it was nice to hear. That was literally the parting words. So I'm proud of it too. It's a lot of work. The hours to EBITDA will never add up. But what I can say to anyone thinking about building something that is, there is real value in following something that means something to you, right? I mean, I know people say it, but it's true. Like this is part of my identity. It's part of my legacy. My daughter's extremely proud of it. She talks about my daddy's a farmer, and so I think following your passions, it does or becoming passionate about something that you're building. I think it does have its own reward. Even if I could have made a lot more money in something in Silicon Valley, but how much do you really need?
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you.
Great talking to you.
Lucidity Insights was founded on the premise that educating startups on the regional tech ecosystems and the key stakeholders within them will not only lead to a healthier and more sophisticated startup ecosystem, but it will also lead to a stronger startup economy, which will benefit the economies of entire countries and the emerging MENAPT region as a whole. You can check out more at lucidityinsights.com.